Welcome to the Hazard Class Podcast. This is the place where I get to ask my stupid questions to some of the smartest people in and around the world of emergency services. My guest this week has dedicated his life to telling the stories of firefighters for over 20 years. His relationship with the fire department started early in his life, and it eventually inspired him to work in the fire service for nearly a decade. Before joining the team at firehouse.com, and the rest is history. We'll talk today about the role of media in the fire service and that history with my guest today, Peter Matthews, the editor-in-chief of Firehouse Magazine. Peter, thanks for joining me today.
Jake, thanks for having me on. I'm really looking forward to today's conversation and catching up with you. It's good to see somebody from back home when I was up in the Midwest.
Of course, yeah. So the big point of this show is the idea that asking questions is good, especially if you can point them at the right people. So kind of in the spirit of that, in the spirit of not being afraid to look maybe a little bit foolish, asking a question you're uncomfortable with, we're going to do a thing called spin the wheel of stupid questions. I'm going to actually spin a wheel. I actually made one. We're going to spin the wheel. We're going to see where it lands us, and then hopefully we'll go from there. Sounds good?
All right. Sounds awesome. Thank you.
Spin that wheel of stupid questions.
So prove it to you once again, right? We do really have a wheel. I'm not faking it. I'm not setting you up.
Looks legit. Looks legit.
Yeah, that soundbite that we just played was an addition from my kids yesterday. They were upset that they weren't involved with the podcast at all, so they wanted to record something for it. So that's what that is. Here you go. Spin the wheel. Mr. Peter Matthews, what is the weirdest or worst thing you've ever eaten just to be polite?
I don't even know what it was. That's how polite I was. I just we were actually. I hope they don't see this show. But we were in Austria. My buddy and I were there about a year and a half ago, and we went to this beautiful place in the mountains. It's like at the head of the Alps, and we had some schnitzel. That's good. That's solid. You know what that is. And then something else came out. It definitely had like an arm or a leg or something, and they cut it up for us. We ate it. I'm not going to say we enjoyed it. We ate it. It was rubbery. It had a taste. It wasn't a foul taste, but it wasn't a pleasant taste. And then we quickly washed it down and went right back to the schnitzel and some of the other stuff that was on the table. So what was it? I don't know, but it was what you had to do the right thing.
Awesome. That's funny, man. That's a unique answer. I don't even know what it was, but that's how polite you are, I guess. So we'll get on with this thing. So I know you started your exposure to the fire department early in your childhood. So tell me about that. Kind of what are your earliest memories dealing with the fire department as a kid?
Yeah, like a lot of other folks in the fire service, my father was in the volunteers on Long Island, Glenwood Fire Company, and I grew up around the firehouse. He was chief 8 years or 10 years before I was even born. So I came into it a little bit later in his career in the fire service, but every Sunday was drill. So after church, he and I would go to drill. And I was very fortunate just to be able to kind of observe from the very beginning. Unfortunately, the department we started with, I never even had a chance to be a member with my father because we had moved upstate to Rush, New York. And I was in the Explorers and I joined the department alongside him. And it was great to serve with him. But, I'm very lucky that in all the things I got to do, I was an intern in Rochester, New York, which, that city still holds near and dear to my heart. I still talk to a lot of the guys up there. I still ride up there when I can. But growing up on Long Island, I was still able to ride, as a teenager, like in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, engine 214, 111 truck. And really to see what firefighting was, right? I mean, you grew up in the fire service on the volunteer side. Now, all of a sudden, you're in one of the worst neighborhoods in the country. And really just to see what it was. And this was before EMS calls, right? So they weren't busy as far as run volume, but they were busy as far as fires and other emergencies. And that's where I really had a chance to see what firefighters do, right? It's not just the fires, right? It's everything else that they do, the water leaks, the elevator emergencies, the forcible entry calls. And that's where I really had an opportunity to say, like, the firefighter really truly is the I hate to say that term, first responder, but they're called and they show up quick, right? And they will mitigate to the best of their ability the problems that these people have, or they will at least guide them to the resources. And that was eye-opening for me, because you got to see this in tenements, you got to see it in the subway system, you got to see it in all these different types of buildings, really experience homelessness. I got to see the drug crisis, through the eyes of the guys in Brooklyn. And that really opened my eyes to what the fire service did. And that was really that first foray. Then when I went to Rochester as an intern, same thing. I was 16. It was a 2-year high school internship program. And then to come here to Firehouse, and see that outside this bubble that we lived in, where I was either a volunteer on Long Island or upstate, the fire service is huge, and there's so much that goes on that folks aren't even aware of. And I get it, right? Like, at the end of the day, you've got so much to focus on in your station. And it's evolved, right? I mean, hazmat, right? Hazmat was a thing in the 90s, and it's like coming back, and it's coming back in full swing. And thank God for the work that you guys do with that, to kind of make sure that folks don't forget that, because it is such an important part of what's going on nowadays.
Yeah. So starting off kind of early, what was it that drew you in? Was it the work? Was it the culture? Was it the brotherhood? What was the thing that made you really identify with the fire service?
That's a tough question. I mean, I think, the family, that draws you in, right? From the time I was a little kid. I mean, I was a part of the firehouse, whether it was in Glenwood, or some of the other places I went to. The guys, even, from Rochester, like I said, it's been 26 years, I think, since I started that internship, or I had that internship. And I still maintain contact with a lot of them. Some of them are still on the job, or they've recently retired. 2 of them are actually down in Florida. So we've been, communicating during all the hurricanes. The sense of family is there, but I think really what pulled me in was just a dedication, right? And it's they do what they have to do, and they go back to doing what they were doing before the call came in, whether they were coming from home or in the firehouse, and really just the mindset of the firefighters, right? You have that sense of humor and just that ball breaking that's going on. Tones drop, boom, it stops, and it's in full mode. And you can tell when things are de-escalating, right? Because that firehouse humor just kind of rolls back in very subtly, and then it's back on, game on, and mission accomplished, right? So,
yeah. So then you started out as a kid seeing it in the stations. Tell me about when you first went to your first fire, when you first had your actual experience of doing the job. What was that like for you?
So, when we lived upstate, when I lived in Rush, we had a couple of small ones. I was out of town, all the good ones, right? But the first really good job I had was, I can talk about it now. Statute of limitations is up, but it was before I joined the Glenwood Fire Company. I was riding mutual aid there, because I was a firefighter within the state, so you could ride mutual aid. And we had a fire in a mobile storage facility, right? It was a large commercial garage. And the call came in, it was like a Saturday afternoon. I left my brother. I was living with my brother at the time. I could smell the smoke. You get to the firehouse at the top of the hill. You see the big old column coming, and we got a mile response. I was teamed up with my best friend from that time, and some really good guys in the rig. We pulled up, and this smoke's just chugging out of this place. And it was the day to pull up boots, right? So you pull up your boots, and you make sure your jacket's all buckled up. We started by helping force entry. Next thing we're taking a line in. And I remember like the water at that point was pretty low to the ground, right? Like you couldn't really get into your boots. And as you started pushing in and pushing and pushing, there was 2 lines at that point. All of a sudden the water is like midway up to your belly. And I just remember like that opportunity. We're on this big 2.5 and this whole thing's burning in the back. And it was wild because it was that they were cutting, or they were trying to cut on a roof. They were forced entry. They were breaking windows, all the radio communication. At that point, I didn't have a radio, but you're listening to the guy next to you or behind you with the radio. And it really showed the coordination and the teamwork that goes into it. I mean, we didn't do a lot of fires there, but we had really good people, people that were dedicated, that trained, that they spent a lot of their off time at the firehouse, making sure things were good. So a commercial fire was really good. And it was actually interesting because we had a rash of 3 commercial fires in that same week. And it was funny because about a month later, I got into the fire company and they're like, hey, rookie, get off the truck. You can't go, because now I was a rookie there. So I lost all the riding privileges I had for like the next 3 months, but I had 3 good fires in a week. So yeah.
So once you actually got into doing the job, how was that similar or different than what you expected it? Did it live up to the expectations you kind of had built up in your mind as a kid?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's tough on the volunteer side, right? Because you don't know who you're going to get. And I think having grown up there, my brothers were in at the time when I joined. So having known who was on the rig at the time, that kind of sets your mindset for, hey, we can be aggressive, or we can get there and we'll do the best that we can do until some other guys get here. So, every call was different, but, the support was always there. Within a couple years there, we had 9/11, which happened, but 20 miles away. And really the camaraderie that came out of that, a lot of people joined the fire company. It was an opportunity to get a lot of people interested who were still interested. It's 23 years later, they're still active members. But I think it was everything I wanted. And really, within about a year and a half of getting in the fire company, that's when I started working at Firehouse. And then I saw this whole other world. I was at the National Fire Academy multiple times, going to all these conferences. And I really wanted, it's what happens with a lot of people who go to their first conference or write their first article. They want to be here. They want to bring their department here because that's where their excitement is. That's where their joy is. But the reality is you've got to start where you're at here and bring yourself up. But I mean, every organization is different. But a little motivation goes a long way. And you can't force it upon people. And that's the one thing I think that I wasn't prepared for, because I was interested. I read Firehouse as a kid. I read the books as a kid. I read every textbook as a kid. When I was an intern in Rochester, if I wasn't, hanging out in the kitchen with the guys, I was in their library reading books. And I wanted to be there. But it just, I had limitations. We only had so many people on a rig. We only had so many runs. We only had so many opportunities for training. And that was the one thing I kind of had to pull that back. And again, I knew what was going on across the country, by 2 or 3 years in a fire company. But I had to remember I was in Glenwood or wherever I was at that time, because, that's my world that I actually live in. I want to be in another world. But I'm very proud to say that, they've done a terrific job at making it a great organization. Because the publisher, or the associate publisher at the time, Jeff Barrington, he was in a fire company as well. So actually you had 2 people working for Firehouse in the same fire company. Wow. Which was really cool because we brought a lot of stuff to the department where we could. Yeah.
So you kind of touched on the dual role that you had for a while, kind of working as a freelance photographer, and also running still on a fire truck. So was that interested in photography and media and storytelling? Was that an early thing too in your life, or where's that come from?
Yeah, so it's kind of a funny story. I want to be a firefighter. I grew up in that world, but growing up on Long Island, you pretty much had one opportunity, and that was FDNY. Like most good Long Islanders, I didn't want to leave Long Island, so I didn't want to test in Westchester County. I didn't want to go to New Jersey. I tested in a few places like Rochester. I missed the FDNY test one year because FDNY's exam was during 9/11. But when I was in high school, a girl I went to high school with, her house caught fire, right? It was, again, like a weekend fire. And I jumped on my scooter and I ran over there with my camera because I had just taken a photo class. And my photo was published in Fire News. And that kind of changed my trajectory as far as my career. Now, if I knew technology would be where it's at today, I probably would have, been a firefighter and a media person. But I didn't know you had that ability. Who knew that technology was down the road where you can have a laptop in a firehouse at work? But once I had that first photo published, and then my dad and I we co-wrote an article for the magazine when I was in high school. I had a couple pictures in the magazine when I was in high school. And that kind of changed it, because I thought, you know what, I could do this in this one place, or I could really document the folks, right? So when I was in high school, I was a public safety reporter. Every fire and accident in town, I was there. And that actually allowed me to get my foot into doors that I would not have otherwise had, even if I was in those fire companies as a member, because, I was an explorer at that point. And that kind of changed it all. So the funny thing with Firehouse is I literally, I was working at a camera store, and I was there for a couple of weeks. I cleaned out like an asbestos-filled closet, which probably makes a lot of sense nowadays, the way my mind is working, right? But and they said, hey, we're going to let you go. And it's this weird situation. So I drove up the road to Firehouse because Firehouse Magazine was like 4 miles away. I drove up and I talked to Jeff Barrington. I said, hey, do you have a job? He says, no. And then a year later they called and that was it. So like I never thought I would have been in this position, but it's been a blessing because I've worked with so many great guys and it's given me a lot of opportunities to kind of pay it forward and pay back people who've helped me through my career, to give them, an opportunity, whether it's a platform online or speaking at the events or, being in a magazine. But it's just, one picture published that changed my entire trajectory of what I wanted to do.
So when you think about your role with Firehouse, when you're working for firehouse.com and now the Firehouse Magazine, what do you see yourself as? Do you see yourself as kind of a documentarian of fire service history and tactics, or you see yourself as a facilitator of a training resource, or is it maybe a dual role?
The reality is I think it's more of a facilitator. I'd like to do more on the documentary side, but the job, all the back end stuff, just like any other, job, it's the stuff you don't see that takes up so much time that I don't have necessarily a chance to share a lot of the stories I do. And we try to find different platforms for that, right? Like the podcast that we're doing now, that's given me an opportunity to catch up with folks that it's not necessarily the written word, but it's some good conversations we've had in person or on the phone. We can carry it over. So I'd say it's a facilitator because there is a lot going on, whether it's, the evolution of look at natural disasters right now. I mean, that's taken up the headlines this year. And, it's some of that work. It's sharing the stories of the firefighters. I mean, I think, unfortunately, we had gotten away from that for a while. We were focused primarily on training. But there's a lot of terrific personalities in the fire service. We've got Ryan Baker, who's our associate editor. He's been working on a lot of those projects, kind of putting some of those influencers profiles out there. So we know them as the cook or, Chief Miller and stuff like that. But now we have an opportunity to share their stories. So we're trying to also, find all those positive stories. I was at an event a few months ago and I kind of opened it up. I said, I know we have a lot of bad news, right? In addition to training, we have a lot of bad news. We need to hear more positive news. I said, please reach out to me. And within about a week, I had 5 or 6 of those chiefs reach out with some positive stories, and it's good because we need some more of that, right? We deal with a lot of bad stuff. The fire service deals with a lot of bad stuff. We need to find those uplifting stories and those stories that really kind of help carry that passion through. So we're not redefining ourselves, but we're making sure we go back to sharing a lot of the good stuff in addition to training and the unfortunate stories that we have to cover.
Yeah. So you kind of touched on this earlier when you talked about, reading everything, reading the magazines and reading the books. What do you think your role is as a fire department media company in inspiring the next generation of firefighters?
I think we want to give everybody we can a voice, right? And we get a lot of submissions in that are, hey, I was just at this conference and John Salka said this, or I was at this conference and, John Hall said this. And so we go through all of this, people kind of sharing their interpretations. But what we want to hear is new and innovative ways to do things. And we understand, there's not going to be, there's 1,000 ways to stretch a hose line. It depends on your building. It depends on your apparatus. It depends on your stacking levels, all that kind of stuff. But we're trying to find ideas and get them out to the masses as best we can, and really the next question is how do we do that format wise, right? Because we have to get beyond the written word and videos and podcasts and all that other stuff. But if you're interested, always reach out, whether it's myself or one of the other publications. There's state publications, there's websites, there's so many places out there. You never have, you can't say that you tried until you try and do it. And we found some real, I like to call them diamonds in the rough. We found a lot of guys in the last, I found a lot of guys in the last 5 years that have a lot of great information. They might be from a small agency, but they're touching areas that aren't really touched. And, a lot of it's leadership development, right? We've got a whole change in fire service leadership in the last 10 years, and chiefs tend to be younger, so they don't have as much leadership experience as the chiefs of years past. So it's not just getting that bachelor's or that master's degree. It's everything else that comes with it. And I'm still learning a lot about it, myself. Pretty much every week we get a question about a leadership issue, and we try to, partner people. So, shoot your shot. If there's something you want to share, if there's something you want to do, we'll help you. I may not be the fastest. I always have to be honest about that. I may not be the fastest getting back to you, but we do want to give you an opportunity. If we see something that we can benefit and our readers can benefit from, then we definitely want to do that. It was interesting, about a year into the position here, the editor-in-chief position, I got a call from a longtime contributor, and they said, "Hey, magazine looks good, but who are these people?" So I just turned around and I said, "Well, who were you 25 years ago?" And it was silence. He goes, "Okay, looks good. Keep up the good work." And that actually was reassuring to me, because, there's a lot of names out there right now, and I shouldn't say just names, right? But there's company names, there's social media handles, and then there's actual, the names, your birth names. And I think there's a lot of noise, and we're trying to figure out who's who and who's valid and who's not. We saw that during COVID. There was a lot of people putting information out there. When we kind of reconvened in 21, there was a ton of new speakers that were submitting for Firehouse Expo. And then, when you looked at it, they had kind of taken off during social media time. And there was a lot of really kind of scary information that was being put out there, or, these really just outside the box ideas that might work in that community, but they're not going to work for the greater good. And so there's a lot of stuff we had to look at post-COVID when a lot of folks kind of launched into teaching.
So when you think about that, next generation, not necessarily the generation of teachers or firefighters, when you think about that little kid curled up reading his Firehouse magazine, mm-hmm. is that consciously considered in the process at all of making your publication? Is it the idea that you as a child could have been the person reading the magazine you're putting out?
Yeah, I mean, it is. Obviously, unfortunately, the magazine has gotten a little bit smaller over the years. I mean, that's just the way this media business has kind of transitioned. I mean, we're very lucky to still have a publication compared to what you look at with some other companies out there. But they know our audience. They still read print. I mean, it's in the firehouse, it's in the kitchen table, it's in the bathroom, it's in the office, wherever it may be, and it's also at home. And we're trying to actually bridge that gap from that person who's just about to enter the fire service, who's just entered the fire service, to the chief. We still have some retirees that read the publication. We get emails from them or phone calls, and the magazine's changed, and you guys are talking about stuff that doesn't work, and you engage them in conversation, find out they retired 20 years ago. So it's an interesting. The audience, the depth of the audience is about 60 years, from those folks who are trying to join to those folks who have since retired. And we try our best to cover something for everybody. We can't do that every month. I mean, it's just not possible between all the disciplines, EMS, leadership, to traditional strategy, the apparatus and everything that's evolving there. But we do look at the younger people, and we want to try to engage them. We've partner with some colleges where we get them some information. We're looking at potentially doing something to that degree to really reach out to those younger people. I had a conversation at a conference a couple months ago. One of the it's a high school 3-year high school program, 2 or 3 year high school program. He wanted to give our magazine to the students. And it was an interesting conversation because essentially, they're not, they haven't taken Fire 1, or they're in the process of taking like a Fire 1 class, Fire 2. So some of the stuff that's in the magazine might skew the way that they approach Fire 1 and Fire 2. So you got to strike that balance. So it's like, do we just create a section for them that's content specific to those people who are really just getting their feet wet? And it's tough because, again, it's like, honestly, from the hazmat perspective or any tech rescue discipline, right? I mean, is it ropes for the first due engine, or is it, some 14 line? And I'm really bad with ropes. I apologize. It's been a long time, but is it some 14 line pickoff? I don't know, tripod, because it is so deep, and there is so much to it. And I mean, I know we all try to get those 40-hour classes done in 32 hours. But the reality is, in written word, even in a textbook, you can only get so much out there because you still have to do that hand-on discipline. And we just want to make sure that what we're putting out, the content that we're putting out there, they have enough that it gets them going. Like, but we know like we can't do a step-by-step on how to put out a private dwelling fire or some sort of technical rescue discipline in 1,500 words. I mean, we know that. So we try to find authors and content that we can put enough out there so they can at least understand what's going on, and then maybe try some stuff in their own department and go from there. But yeah, ultimately we want to have that next generation because they're going to be chiefs in 15 or 20 years.
Yeah. So as we start to kind of wrap up here, I want to dig deep with you a little bit. So when you think about your time with Firehouse Magazine eventually ending, what do you want your legacy to be inside the media of the fire service?
You know, I just hope we make a difference, you know, going back to, you know, many, many years ago, right? So we used to get letters to the editor. So like when I started here, I was the first one on Firehouse to have an email address, right? Like, so when I started here, we would get letters to the editor, and my job was to open the envelope and read them. And there was an article that had come in about an article written by Mark McLeese, who was a captain in Syracuse Rescue 1 at the time, went on to be chief of department. And Mark had written an article about an SCBA writ bailout. I forget the exact topic of the article. And this guy wrote in, and it's not even 2 months after the article was published. And he goes, hey, you know, I just want to thank McLeese for writing this piece. 4 days after I read the article, I was in a similar situation. I was able to get out. So, two of his partners had gotten seriously injured. But he had he'd read the article. He was able to use it and essentially save his life. And I think that's it. I mean, I just hope, what we're doing every day is making a difference. And it was kind of interesting. A couple months ago, we were interviewed by Crackle magazine, and all the editors were. And one of the things I just said was, anytime there's a firefighter injury or death, it causes pain, right? Like for us, I mean, we take it to heart, right? Because did they read that article? Did we cover that? How did we fail to cover that topic? And, a couple of weeks later, we had the fire here in Fort Worth where I was riding with the guys, and they had to bail out. And, one guy partially fell through the roof, and the other, the officer came off the roof. He slid and fell off the roof. And I had my camera. So I was riding out for the first time in a couple of months, and I shot the whole thing, and I'm watching it unfold. And after I kind of got everything figured out, we sent the pictures in from the night, and I got home, and I just kind of remember playing that quote that ended up being the end of the article, right? It pains us when somebody gets hurt. So I just, I hope that the readers that we start with when they're 18, continue to read us through age 55 or whatever their retirement age is, and that they have a healthy and safe career. That's ultimately our goal. And that they pick up tricks along the road that helps them, do a better job, whether it's a tactical issue or staffing and, vehicle issue or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for your commitment to telling fire stories and inspiring the next generation. Tell us where we can find more content from you. Tell us how we can look up the podcast and the conferences you have coming up.
Okay. Well, I appreciate it. So firehouse.com, you can find everything from the magazine and online there. The Firehouse Yak is a podcast. It's a bi-weekly show we're doing since the beginning of the year. We also have Fire Fusion is our new conference in Charleston, South Carolina. It's more of a tech conference. It replaced Firehouse Expo. But with technology coming into the fire service, this opportunity here is for us to kind of share the reality of what's going on in the fire service, not necessarily, thinking 5 years down the road, but what's already employed by the fire service. And we also have the Station Design Conference, which is a great program Janet Wilmoth puts on. There's so many fire stations being built. Surprisingly, the number of fire stations being built in this country, which is good because the infrastructure is there for the fire service to have a home to store their equipment and train. So that's kind of the big deal here. But, I really appreciate it. It's good to get on with you and finally have a chance to meet you. I know we've chatted before and where you're from, again, obviously that city holds a big place in my heart, having lived there for 10 years and just had the opportunity to see what goes on there. And my first rescue that I ever photographed was actually right down the road. I used to live on Selby, and the fire was it was a block from Fives. And I photographed the end of a rescue when I was riding in Brooklyn as a kid. And then it was on Portland, actually. And then they brought a girl out the third floor window, and it was 18s did it. And so, again, that's another city, 10 years there, you really got to know the guys. And again, I still talk to a lot of folks from there, and that means a lot to me to still have those friendships.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on to talk to me. I really appreciate it. Getting to know you, getting to hear your story and what kind of inspires you. And I really appreciate the time.
All right. Thanks, Jake. I appreciate it.